Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to give a few minutes for our numbers to tick up here for everybody to get signed in, and then we will get started. Okay, it looks like our numbers are climbing but slowing down a little bit. So we'll just give it one more moment and get the most amount of people signed in as we can, and then we will get going. Okay, I think we'll get started with our webinar today. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Nicole Eck. I am the Chief Strategy Officer for the ALS Association, and I will be hosting your webinar today. I just want to thank you all for taking the time to join us today. I'm going to provide you with a brief overview of our Zoom controls and how you can submit some questions throughout the webinar. So you will have an opportunity to submit text questions today to our presenters by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your webinar window. Please send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will answer your questions during our Q&A session of the presentation, and we will have Q&A towards the end. So you will have plenty of time to think about your questions, submit your questions via the chat, and we will address those questions during our Q&A. We have a pretty full agenda today, including a discussion with ALS researcher Dr. Lyle Ostro, remarks from Paul Seifert, who serves on the ALS Association's Advocacy Committee, and ALS Association staff will be providing details on how you can help. Thank you again for joining us today. And right now, I would like to introduce Colleen Ballas, our president and CEO of the ALS Association. Colleen?
Hi, thanks, Nicole. And I too want to say thank you to everyone for being here today and taking time out of your day to do this important work. So today we're going to be talking about how you can make a difference in supporting appropriations for ALS research. As you may or may not know, Congress, well, they haven't been as busy as they should have, maybe. So far, they haven't been able to pass legislation to fund the federal agencies in FY24. So instead, they've been using what we call continuing resolutions that provides funding only for a few months right now at a time at their current funding levels. Now, even more concerning is that House Republicans are discussing making cuts in the federal programs, including reductions in ALS research for FY25 budget. As I'm sure you feel the same way I do, this is totally unacceptable, and we must really fight hard to protect the ALS research funding. We believe that Congress can and must make actually significantly larger investments across the board to help us find treatments and cures. And I know that we can find those treatments and cures if we have more federal funding in our research areas. So that's where you come in. Members of Congress are elected by you. They listen to you and your voice. The ability that you have, that people living with ALS have and their families to influence Congress is really, really powerful. And we're just here to help give you some of the tools and guidance. And I know you can go and make a huge difference. As always, the competition for research dollars all across the federal agencies is high. And unless we fight for it, and to really boost ALS research funding, they can be cut. So the ALS Association is leading the charge to push Congress to not only protect, but also boost ALS research, as I mentioned. As part of a recent Board of Trustee meeting that happened just last week, here are some nice pictures from that. 35 high-level meetings with the House and the Senate leadership were completed by 9 individuals either living with ALS or their families and someone living with ALS. And here's the photos here show just how powerful some of these meetings were. I can tell you some of the meetings I had were very, very encouraging. And now we need your help to just continue that momentum. After this webinar, you're going to receive an action alert that you can immediately use to reach out to your members of Congress. And I really hope that you will take action and also invite your friends and family to become ALS advocates. I'm really looking forward to today's webinar. We've got some great guests with us. And with that, I'd like to invite Nicole back onto the screen to introduce our next guest. Nicole?
Thanks, Colony. I would now like to introduce a phenomenal member of the association's advocacy committee, Paul Seifert. Paul has extensive experience advancing policies at the federal and state level to improve healthcare. Paul has a vast well of knowledge of the federal budget and appropriations process and has a track record of proven successes. We are so thankful to have Paul on our advocacy committee and speaking with us today. Paul, if you join me on camera, you can take it away.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Nicole, for that gracious introduction. I'm going to start off by saying that if you've been listening to the news at all, you know that it's going to be a very tough year for Congress. They're starting out way behind the 8 ball because they haven't even finished up last year's appropriations bills. So it's going to move fast. Now, the good news is the president's budget does increase NIH funding to over $50 billion. So that's a good start. But I can tell you that president's budgets don't really mean much on the Hill. But it does indicate that he thinks it's a priority for research funding. So that's a good start, but it's just the start. Congress makes all these decisions. And we are facing difficult times around spending because of the deficit and the debt and the fact that it's a campaign year. And they all want to go home and campaign. So this is where you come in. I have fought many a battle in tough times, lean times, and robust times for the federal budget. I did this all in the disability community. And one thing I can tell you is the importance of having a crackerjack team like you've got at the ALS Association, pushing constantly on Congress to do the right thing. But for all that, they need to be backed up by strong people back in those congressional districts, responding to those alerts and writing those emails, coming to Washington and making your voice heard is extremely important. They'll be telling you later on how to do that, how to sign up, how to become an advocate. Your friends, your family, everybody needs to be in this battle. How important is it? Well, I remember a long time ago, there was a battle for a bill today that we almost take for granted, the Americans with Disabilities. And we got it passed. Not just because we had a lot of great people in Washington fighting for it, but because people with disabilities of all kinds came to Washington and made Congress know that they were a force to be reckoned with. We got the ADA. Now, we could do that. We could do this. And just how important is federal funding for research for ALS is not robust enough yet. And so we need to push them, tell them that the science is not catching up to the disease. And if we wanted to do that, the federal government has to step up. So I urge you to sign up, get involved, respond to those action alerts. And when you have the opportunity, come out to DC and lobby and do your own lobbying. Do it, because they listen even to those emails. You think they don't read them, you think they don't hear you, but they do. They count it up, they add them up. So every email matters, every letter matters, every telephone call matters, because they count them up, and if they get dozens, hundreds of those, they know there's people out there who are caring about research on ALS. So with that, I will pass it along.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you for your tireless and your passionate advocacy. As you said, every action you take, it matters. And certainly every action you have taken is, whether advocating on the Hill or the actions you take every day, Paul, really, really matter. So thank you so much for joining us today. Joining us now is, again, Colleen Balas, as well as Dr. Lyle Ostro. Dr. Ostro is a neurologist and ALS researcher at the Lewis Katz School of Medicine at Temple University. He is also the director of the Temple University ALS Postmortem Core, which is funded by the collaboration with the CDC National ALS Registry and provides autopsy tissues to academic and industry ALS researchers around the world. Dr. Ostro is director of the Temple Nerve and Muscle Biopsy Service and Neuromuscular Pathology Lab, and has a research grant from the NIH to study how to preserve neuromuscular junctions as a possible ALS treatment. Dr. Ostro is chair of the programmatic panel of the Department of Defense ALS Research Program, the ALSRP, presently the largest dedicated annual funder of ALS therapeutic discovery and validation. He helped lead ALSRP efforts to develop and refine funding mechanisms to help novel treatments move through the drug development pipeline, emphasize biomarker development, and encourage open data and resource sharing. So I'm going to turn it over now to Colleen and to Lyle, and thank you for joining us today, Lyle.
Thanks, Nicole. And wow, Lyle, after that read, I don't know why I'm here. I think you should just chat yourself. This is great. I do want to say thank you for joining us. Rumor has it that you are on vacation and you're taking a little time away from your vacation to do this webinar. So thanks so much for that. I know the community really appreciates it. And I think, what we wanted to talk about the bulk of today is that funding around DoD and the ALSRP program, which obviously you've been intricately involved with. So let me start you off with a little bit of a softball question and maybe get this started, which is, I know you've been involved, I think, since 2013 with the program. So can you talk a little bit about what you've seen change over these last 11 years with the program? See maybe how it's evolved a bit.
Sure. Thank you so much. And really, I'm just thrilled to be here. And let me first start by saying, I am a part of the ALS research program at the DoD, as you said, since 2013. I'm a volunteer. I serve on what's called the programmatic panel. I'm not an employee of the DoD. I don't get, funding from them or anything like that. I serve on this programmatic panel alongside people with lived experience of disease, caregivers, advocates, representatives of foundations like the ALS Association, and we all have the same voice. And it's really the thing that I probably love the most about this program. And so this program, the ALS research program, is part of what's called, the CDMRPs, Congressionally Directed Medical Research Programs. And they wouldn't even exist if it wasn't for grassroots advocacy. They started in the early 90s. The first one was a breast cancer program. It's grown to now I think there's definitely over 30. I'm not sure of the total number of disease-specific CDMRPs. And they all have this same sort of structure where everything about them involves, people with lived experience, involves the communities, involves the researchers, to make sure that they're prioritizing the right things. Now, when I joined the program, I got to be honest. So this was I think 2013. The budget was not so great. And because of that, we would get 80 grant proposals a year, and we could fund, 3 or maybe 5. And it was challenging because no matter how good a job you do, that doesn't feel very impactful. Over the years, we worked very hard to kind of fill a niche and to figure out what's the most important stuff that we could be funding. And what I think this program is known for most is funding innovative new therapy ideas. Not just basic science, mechanistic basic science, but truly new ideas for therapies. And that's always been the priority. A few years ago, we kind of heard this rumor that maybe the budget was going to be increasing, and we wanted to make sure we were ready for this. And so, and the reason the budget was increasing was because of advocacy. And so we surveyed the whole community. We surveyed people living with disease. We surveyed researchers, clinicians, industry. We talked to venture capital and said, when small pharma comes to you and from ALS land, and what are they not good at? And we used all this information and to figure out how to expand what we were doing, right? And so when the budget first increased a little bit, we still didn't really have enough money to fund trials. But what we kept hearing from everyone over and over was we need to figure out, we know ALS is a bunch of different mechanisms, a bunch of different diseases. We need to figure out which therapies are going to work in which people. And so we added mechanisms to define biomarkers, to define subsets of patients, to figure out which ALS science was going to be the right science for the right people in clinical trials and how to tell. And we also, I'm proud to say we've had some success with things moving through our pipeline, through these grants to fund innovative new ideas, through what we call the Therapeutic Development Award, which funds IND enabling studies, the kinds of things you need to get to a clinical trial, like how do you manufacture the drug? Is it toxic? How do you optimize its chemistry? And so now with increased funding from advocacy, we are able to fund early phase clinical trials. We're able to find mechanisms that add on biomarker development to otherwise funded trials. And this is the sort of thing that's going to make it so that in the future, when we have trials, we can tell, is the drug getting to where it needs to go? Are we involving the right patients? When a trial doesn't work, we can figure out why doesn't it work and who might be the right people to get it. And so, that evolution is what's made this fun. And so now, rather than funding 3 awards a year, we fund 40. Wow. And every year we're able to make a big impact.
That's amazing. I didn't realize the number had jumped that much. I recognize the funding had jumped a lot, but that the number that you're funding is amazing. So you touched on something that I hear all the time, and I just want to reiterate it for our audience and kind of go into a little bit deeper dive on a couple areas. One, you mentioned that the DoD funding is really innovative. And I've seen that over the years as well. I actually, having come from the cancer space, I know the CDMRP program well, and it is innovative. And that's the unique nature of it. That's a little different from NIH. And I know I and other advocates always get that question of, isn't this just funding the same stuff that the NIH is funding? And you mentioned, no, this isn't basic biology, right? You also mentioned, obviously, the clinical trials and the biomarker development. And when we're thinking about really trying to invest in treatments and cures, I'm from your perspective, how do you feel like those priorities in particular fit into that larger landscape of therapy development, in our community and in our space?
Sure. So we have different agencies that fund different parts of the therapy development pipeline, we call it sometimes in ALS. And so, and by the way, you guys mentioned at the beginning, I do have funding from the CDC and from NIH. And so how do these programs fit together? Well, the CDC really are the ones who are best equipped to do research and data gathering on environmental exposures and epidemiology and risk and these sorts of ideas about who gets ALS and how can we share this data and do it broadly so that we're not duplicating efforts. And then, the NIH is absolutely critical for truly, innovative new basic science, mechanistic science. Not necessarily, I'm testing out this therapy, but the chemistry and what's going on in the cells and what is the actual, the building blocks of how these diseases work. The NIH funding, when we talk about it, so NIH funding is critical, and it's critical to fund, new scientists and new labs across the country. It's not necessarily a bucket of money dedicated to ALS, the way that perhaps the CDC registry and the DoD program are. So what I mean by that is that the budget for the DoD program, which last year was $40 million, that's all going to these mechanisms to fund ALS research. For the NIH, it's really important that we advocate for increased funding across the board, but it's not as if there's a big chunk of money that says this has to be spent specifically on ALS research. It's whatever grants are written, whatever specific grants come in and are reviewed and are thought to be good ideas, those get funded. And then sort of after the fact, they get coded for what the funding is. But the role of the NIH in sort of figuring out that basic science, that's, and I have a grant from them myself on a project with collaborators. Oh, by the way, I actually met those collaborators originally because they were using tissues from me from this effort that now is funded by the CDC to provide tissues and data. But in any case, and then the job of the DoD programs are sort of to take that basic science and really focus on therapy development, on getting these therapies into trials, and trials that teach us about who we should be using them in, and giving us the information we need for the later phase trials.
Wow, that's really interesting. I appreciate that so much. When I first got here to the ALS Association, I think the DoD budget line was around $10 million, if memory serves me right. Then we were able to double it, and then we were able to double it again. And that's, as you said, the impact of advocates, right? The people who are listening in today and are going to be calling their members of Congress and senators and talking to them about what is the impact of further increasing, not just maybe the DoD numbers, because frankly, we're going to ask for it all, even if we don't get it. But also increasing NIH and CDC. You said you went from funding around 3 or 4 trials to now funding 40. So if I'll just wave a magic wand and pretend if we could get it to double again,
Yeah.
what is the committee and volunteers and others looking at around this particular funding source, and what do you think about NIH and CDC as well?
Sure. So, and by the way, just last week, the DoD team, the ALS research program team, put out a new program guide. If you go to the ALSRP website, you'll find there's a 2-pager. Then there's also a more detailed program guide that talks about how these programs have evolved and the funding and the role of people living with the disease and all that fun stuff. As far as my own personal feelings, so first of all, when the budget's gone up, the thing I love about this program, we're not just like 7 people sitting in a room saying, "Hey, let's do this." It really is crowdsourced and evidence-based. And we mentioned that there's all these other programs in the CDMRP and other diseases, right? And so when we've expanded, when we've added mechanisms, we're able to go to these other programs, some of which have much larger budgets, and ask their program directors, what worked for you? What didn't work? What's been successful in funding, getting things through this pipeline and into successful trials? And we're able to, rather than reinvent the wheel, we're able to take bits and pieces and mechanisms that have been tried and true from these other programs. And for example, so 2 of the ones that I think about, so the breast cancer program and the prostate cancer research program, both of them have considerably larger budgets, right? And these are programs that have been successful in funding later stage, larger clinical trials, which we can't do with our current budget. We can't even approach it. And again, this is my opinion. I'm not speaking for the ALSRP, but I would love it if we could. And I would love it if we could, because there's a huge literature about the importance of not just having industry-sponsored late phase trials and being able to be a little bit, to have trials that are funded not by industry. And part of the reason for that is that in the trial mechanisms, we can set criteria, right? So right now, our clinical trial mechanisms with DoD, they require people with lived experience to be involved in the planning and execution of every phase of these trials, right? Our mechanisms to fund biomarker development, they absolutely require data sharing. We don't just make people write a data sharing statement, we score it. It's part of how these things are evaluated. These are the things that the community has said is important. Now, as far as what I would love to see from the DoD program is if funding was on the level of some of these other programs, they have mechanisms ready to go, that we could adopt into ALS and hopefully be successful. As far as funding for NIH and CDC, so, the CDC was conceived at a time, we didn't live in this data-heavy, interconnected world we live in now. And the one thing we all hear about over and over is, oh, we have to collaborate, we have to share data, we have to stop duplicating efforts. My personal feeling is that I think if CDC budget was increased, that really the CDC could play a bigger role in helping to standardize the way that data is de-identified, right? The way that we are able to share and collaborate across these efforts so that we didn't all have to deal with this on our own with our own institutions. And I really think it's something that is what a modern day disease registry should be involved with.
That's really, and I don't think I've heard someone say that. So that's really interesting on the CDC perspective. So I know we're about to get the hook here and move over to the next conversation. I do want to ask you one question because I know you're not going to be able to stick around for our Q&A. I think we'll be able to get to a lot of the questions that I'm starting to see coming in the chat. But one person asked about any advances around why people in the armed services have a higher incidence of ALS, and if we're any closer to understanding that at all. And I know it comes up all the time, wondering, why. So I don't know if you have any answer to that.
Sure.
A little bit off the
So, by the way, I'm happy to stick around for the Q&A. I didn't know.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, not a problem at all. I talk too much. You guys, anyone who knows me knows this. It's a sickness, but I own it. And I work for anyway. So, the short answer is that we're learning more about what sorts of risk factors might be involved. But I have to tell you, my own personal feeling is I'm not sure if they're risk factors versus genetic predispositions. And what I mean by that is that, it may be that the same things that make people want to enlist in the Army or be a good soldier also make them at higher risk to develop ALS. And it's not a short answer, but there is some evidence for that. There's some evidence that for example, it's not that playing professional soccer is a risk factor for ALS. It may be that the same thing that make people good at being a center mid on a professional soccer team, that those same genetics might increase the risk of developing ALS later in life. So I think we still have a lot to learn about that.
That's interesting too. Thank you so much. All right, Lyle, this has been fun. I wish we had more time. I'm going to go ahead and turn the mic back over to Nicole, and she will introduce our next session.
Thank you, Colony, and thank you, Dr. Ostro, for that really interesting discussion. And if you can see all the questions that are actually coming in that I think you generated during your chat, we're going to probably get to them throughout the webinar as well as maybe in the Q&A at the end. But thank you for your discussion. And now I believe we have some prepared remarks from some special guests. So I'm going to turn it over to our folks behind the scenes here for those remarks.
Hi, I'm Senator Chris Coons from Delaware. Thank you to the ALS Association for inviting me to speak to the resilient, brave, and strong ALS community from across our nation. Thank you for all that you're doing to increase awareness, to advocate, and to fight for greater funding for ALS research. As co-chair of the Senate ALS Caucus, as a member of the Senate committee responsible for funding research into diseases like ALS, I promise we won't let up in our efforts to fund the research that develops better treatments and eventually a cure for this dreaded disease. Over the last few years, thanks to your hard work, we've seen real progress. We now have a more comprehensive ALS research agenda, and research has advanced to the point where we can now identify clinically useful biomarkers to isolate specific genes linked to this disease. In Congress, we passed bills like the Act for ALS bill, which I introduced, co-sponsored, that are funding essential research, expanding access to promising treatments, and authorizing $100 million annually to carry out these priorities. Our path forward is promising, but we need you. With your advocacy, as long as funding from Congress continues, we can make ALS a survivable disease within a decade. As an appropriator, I'll keep pushing funding to the highest levels to advance research and treatment and find a cure for ALS. Your voices drive the funding levels. My colleagues and I listen to what you have to say. So keep speaking up. Keep pushing us until we are able to fully fund ALS research. Keep doing the good, hard work we need to defeat this terrible disease. I'm inspired by the grace and the courage of those suffering with ALS and their families. I'm grateful for your engagement and advocacy that brings attention every day to those suffering from this disease. Your engagement today and every day is invaluable. It builds hope. I look forward to working with all of you and keeping up the fight until we end ALS. Thank you.
Hey everybody, it's Congressman Seth Moulton from Massachusetts. One of the towns that I'm proud to represent is the city, actually, of Beverly, Massachusetts, which is the hometown of Pete Frates. Pete was one of the more famous ALS patients of the past couple decades because he started the Ice Bucket Challenge. He got me to do it. He got thousands of people across America to do it, bringing attention to this devastating disease and also raising thousands of dollars, literally hundreds of thousands of dollars, to advance ALS research. Getting to know Pete and his family personally, because I worked for them as their representative, taught me so much about the impact of this disease on the individual, the family. I mean, Pete had not only brothers, mom and dad, but kids. And to watch his family so bravely go through this, to watch Pete so bravely go through this was inspiring to me and my work on so many levels. But of course, it also brought home the urgency that we have to approach this problem. We've got to accelerate ALS research, and I'm doing what I can in Congress to do that. I know as a Marine veteran that ALS disproportionately affects veterans, and that's why we try to get ALS research dollars in the defense bill every single year. But there's so much more we can do as a community and as a country, so thank you for all you're doing to bring attention to this disease, to work on getting us towards a cure, and to take care of everyone who's affected by it. Thanks, I stand with you. Keep in touch.
Thank you for sharing those messages. And I am now going to turn it over to Denise Balin. She is the Senior Director of Congressional Affairs at the ALS Association. Denise?
Hi, everyone. Hi, I'm Denise Balin. I am your lobbyist, one of the lobbyists for the ALS Association. Today I'd like to talk to you about what are we asking Congress to do this year and basically every year. So we can go to the next slide. All right, so I spend most of my days talking to members of Congress and their staff about ALS. And these days I'm talking to them about funding more ALS research because it's appropriation season on Capitol Hill. But right now, Congress is still finishing their work on last year's funding. I know Paul discussed it earlier. And at the same time, Congress is also asking their constituents for feedback on what should Congress spend their money on for next year. So we're working in this lovely dual track with a lot of work, and that's why we need more people to talk about appropriations for ALS research. Our asks are the same year after year. The word is more. We need more funding for ALS research so we can find new treatments and a cure, but also prevent ALS and improve the care for people living with ALS. So we're lobbying, we're putting in requests with every appropriator on Capitol Hill. There's a lot of them. And we also need you. So let me tell you more about what we need you to do in a second. As you might have watched, the president had a State of the Union earlier this month, and he put out his own budget. Like Paul said, Congress does their own thing. It's a suggestion from the president what they want. He wants the federal government to spend their money on, but Congress really has the final say in everything that goes on. So there's a lot of back and forth, as we constantly see every year, before the federal government can finalize their budget. And we need to push for more ALS research in that budget. So if we go to the next slide. So overall, Dr. Ostro shared with us how the federal government really supports a lot of the ALS research from all these agencies. And I want to share with you where and how much money Congress spends on ALS research. Well, I'll tell you what's happening now and where we need to go. So as you can see, each department, the federal government, plays a part in finding new treatments for ALS. I think Dr. Ostro called it the development. I call it a funnel, the way I look at it, but it's the development of ALS research and treatments. So, but we need more funding to get us to those more treatments. So as you can see, each department plays their own role. So NIH, as you know, they're top government research organization, largest public funder of ALS. And right now for ALS research, NIH is spending 131 million, but we need at least 30 million more. So we'll find out very soon how much we're getting for fiscal year 24. But that could include a cut, because NIH is being cut overall, likely. We'll find out more probably in the matter of hours on the impact ALS research will have with a cut at NIH. So, but the next piece is the CDC. We go to the CDC. As Dr. Ostro talked about, it's a largest prevention research program for ALS. It's currently funded at 10 million, but if we can increase it more to 15 million, we could do more prevention and risk mitigation research. And we need to be able to prevent ALS as well. So we need this as a part of the development of ALS treatments. So next is the DoD. And as we've discussed, military veterans are more likely to develop ALS than civilians. The DoD created a program for ALS. Right now, we talked about, it's $40 million, but we want to double this so we can support more clinical trials for ALS. You know, the DoD program is a high risk, high reward situation, and we need to really put more effort behind them for that. And because the next part is the FDA and the NIH, but because of the advocacy on Capitol Hill from ALS advocates across the country, Act for ALS was passed, which created new programs at the FDA and NIH. Although these programs were created, they also need to be funded. So at the FDA, they support research that will help get new treatments and new cures in the hands of people with ALS faster. So right now, current funding is at 5 million, but we want to fully fund the Act for ALS and ask for 25 million. This will also support a lot of public-private partnerships for more ALS research on the private sector as well. And also part of Act for ALS is the next little bullet is expanded access. We need to keep the current funding of 75 million so that people living with ALS now can access experimental therapies through the NIH program. So we need to keep asking for the same amount this year, next year, and every year. But I can't keep asking Congress alone. I need everyone who has been impacted by ALS to come together and ask Congress to invest in ALS and increase funding for ALS research. So with that, pass it back to Nicole.
Thanks, Denise, for those details. We appreciate it. We're getting some questions in our Q&A before this about our asks, so I appreciate you going through that. And now joining us is Dustin Purchall. He is our Director of Engagement and Mobilization for the ALS Association to share what actions you can take with your members of Congress to secure support for ALS research appropriations. Dustin?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be with you. at this critical moment. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So I can leave it up there on screen for you all. As you've heard from all of our speakers today, we need increased funding in ALS research, and right now we're facing cuts. So we need everyone on this call to contact Congress. And we have several ways that you can do this to get access to our action alert. You can text research to 1-855-469-2621, and you'll get the link right there on your phone and can take action on your mobile device. You can actually also scan that QR code with your phone to get access there. Or if you prefer, there is also a shortened link that we have there on the screen, and I put in the chat there that you can click on and access that link directly. So we need everyone, and we share this with your friends, your family, anyone and everyone to get those messages into Congress. So if you've taken action before, you'll go right to the alert page. But if you haven't, the system will ask you for some short questions there: your first name, your last name, your email. They will need your home address, because that's how our system will find your members of Congress and specifically target that alert to them. We will also ask you for your cell phone number, and then you can decide whether you want texting or not. And we are very judicious about this. You say no, you won't get any text. But if you do select yes, you'll be the first to know about the latest advocacy news as we go forward. And then you will want to share your connection to ALS, whether you're an advocate or what your connection is there. Once you have done that, it will take you to a page where you will see the 3 legislators. It'll be your representative and your 2 senators that this message will go to. You will also see that you can edit the subject line, and then there is a middle box there where you can plug in your own story, share, and really customize this alert and share your message with members of Congress. And then below that, you will see that we've already pre-populated all of the legislative asks that relates to appropriations, so you don't have to worry about any of the numbers. And then at the very, very bottom, when you scroll down, there's a button that says submit my selected letters. And that's how you will send them. You'll also notice there, we'll sign it with your name and then your address. If for any reason you need to update your address, in the upper right-hand corner, you will see it says hello and then your name. You simply click on that, and there'll drop-down button that you can click that says update information, and you can change your address if you need to there, if you run into any issues. But as I said, we're leaving this on screen, so I hope folks are pulling out their phones and are beginning to get this done as we send those messages in to Congress, because we really need to storm the hill on this. And then once you do hit submit, you'll get a confirmation screen that will thank you for taking action. It will provide you links to both our Facebook and Twitter page. It will actually also tell you about the points you earned. So you will have earned 3 points for each of those messages that go in, for a total of 9 points on our gamification system, to going all the way from a regular advocate to a super advocate for us. There will also be links where you can share on Facebook, you can share on Twitter, and you can share this on LinkedIn. And I highly encourage you to choose a platform to share it on with your friends and family, coworkers, and others. And that's it. It's as simple as that, to be able to send the message in and make your voice heard on Capitol Hill. And we need as many voices as we can, because it's a very critical moment. They're supposed to make this decision within the next several hours, by the end of this week. So now it's critical to share your voice and why we need this ALS research funding. So with that, I will kind of turn it over to Nicole again, and we can begin to move on to questions.
Thank you, Dustin. And I will ask you to stay on camera and have Denise join us again. And I believe we will definitely have some questions here as well for Dr. Ostro, as well as Colleen. There's a pretty good spread of questions here for us. So I am going to moderate us through this portion of the webinar and do some Q&A. I'm going to start with, I believe this question is probably best suited for Denise. How do we influence our senators and our congresspeople to get better educated on the ALS topic specifically? They were referring to some interactions with their particular office that they are represented by, and that they feel that they get back emails about Medicare, but not necessarily in response to their specific questions about ALS. So what can they do to better educate around this issue?
First off, do what you're doing and reach out to your members of Congress first. Keep doing it. That's what I want to first say. As a person who was on the other side on Capitol Hill, there are some times that I don't know much about the topic, so I'll just send a another letter of a topic I do know. So that means you need to, do a little bit more work on ALS, but we need to do more work on ALS. That's what it is. We all need to come together and make sure they understand. And a lot of times people might know, one of the first questions I ask on Capitol Hill, I ask the staffer or I ask the member, I go, do you know what ALS is? And some might say yes, some might say no, some might be like, remember the ice bucket challenge? I remember doing that. So I try to explain what ALS is and start off first so that we're all level set. So it's a constant reminder, unless you're impacted by it personally, it's a constant reminder of what ALS is. So keep talking with them. I'll keep talking with them so that they get it right and they really hear us and understand what we're asking for.
Thanks, Denise. I think I have a two-part question here. I think the first part I'll address to Colleen, and then the next part perhaps to you, Denise. Colleen, are all the monies that are spent each year on ALS research, does some of it lay in limbo until trial administration catches up?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. Yeah, I would say the broad brush stroke is sometimes it does, and I'm sure Dr. Ostra could probably jump in here as well. Even with the ALS Association funding, I know we do this as well, as you always want to create milestones along the way, so that even if a project has, I'll make it up, maybe $2 million in funding, most agencies won't just push all of that money out at once. We might actually ask people to create milestones so we can see if those milestones are being hit along the way. So that's my very high level answer to that. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add.
I can speak a little bit, at least to the DoD, to the
Yep.
ALS program. So, and actually, if you guys go on the website, each year there's a PDF there that sort of lists how much money was spent on exactly what. But for the DoD, so each year it's an annual appropriation, right? And all that money gets spent each year. And that's important. So if you get a grant from the DoD that's, let's say, a 3-year grant, that's all budgeted in the year that you got the grant, because who knows what the funding level is going to be in future years. And one of the things that I really love about being on the programmatic panel for the DoD is that we literally spend every penny. And so if we have like a little bit of money left over after we made the decisions on who to fund, and we say, we really loved this one grant that just missed the funding cut. I wonder if we could just fund one aim of that, or 2 aims, or fund part of that. We will do whatever we can to make sure that we are using every penny to accelerate ALS research in any way. But for the DoD program, yes, that the whole budget is allocated each year.
Thanks, Dr. Ostra.
Thank you. And the second part to this question for you, Denise, is, in addressing Congress and senators, do we have a specific list of what won't get done if funding is cut?
No, we don't. Specifically at NIH. They just get a whole pot of money. And I think I answered one question that the House Republicans are thinking about cutting NIH funding overall 38 billion. Whereas the slight increase on the Senate side, so they're going to have to come in middle of the road and possibly have a cut. So they have to set their own agenda every year. It's just a matter of what grant proposals come in, and how much funding they have available at each agency to decide what they are or are not funding. And at most agencies, there's multi-year contracts. So research doesn't just happen in 1 year and you're done. Sometimes it's a multi-year contract because you want to track the progress of your research throughout the years. So NIH, a lot of the times, will fund it for a multiple year purpose. So the money will be spent in 1 year, but you don't have to spend it again year after year. So the research continues as we go on, even if there could be a lack in 1 year, but we need to keep that momentum moving forward. We don't want to go backwards.
Thanks, Denise. Colleen, and I think probably Dr. Ostro, this question is for you all. Is there a database where data is collected for people who are diagnosed with ALS and that is tracked?
the short answer is yes. The CDC has an ALS registry. The funding that we're asking for the CDC supports that registry. It's been going on for quite some time now. There are also a couple of other databases that collect information for people living with ALS. There are a couple state-based databases. I know Massachusetts has one, for example. And then there are also bigger research projects. Answer ALS, for example, collects a lot of data and mines that data as well. So yes, there is, and some of it lives in different places. I think that's why Dr. Ostro earlier was talking about collaboration and coordination, and maybe getting the CDC to have a bigger budget so that it can be a larger coordinator of all of these different collection methods. Dr. Ostros, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so so certainly the CDC registry is the number one answer to that. But I mean, there's so many programs in ALS that are collecting so much cool and amazing and fascinating data. And we talk about all the time how, we need to be sharing this, and it's not so easy, right? So realize, first of all, the language isn't always the same, right? What you call certain things. If you have something that you're recording about a person with ALS, what does mild, moderate, or severe mean, right? And so you have to harmonize the way that all of these different databases even just talk about symptoms or blood measurements or digital biomarkers or whatever they may be. What I was getting at before, so every time that someone enrolls in a trial or enrolls in a study that's collecting information, you get an ID, right? Like something that de-identifies you, so that your data can be collected and somehow linked to you, but nobody knows who you are, so that it can maintain confidentiality. And the problem is these unique identifiers, these de-identification methods, there's like 12 different ones. And it's really challenging as researchers involved in these different studies to share data across them, because we can't figure out which data is linked to which people. Ideally, a person living with ALS would have a single unique identifier that would follow them as they went from trial to trial or research study to research study, and was truly de-identified. So it wouldn't allow anybody to figure out who the data was, but it would be linked, and it would be linked to who are their family members and who are their kids. Again, de-identified. And my sort of dream is that I would really love to see the CDC registry, not reinvent the wheel, but take one of these used methods for doing this right now, for maintaining confidentiality, for de-identifying data, and administer it on a truly global way, so that we as scientists have an easier time sharing data and really getting access to these different databases in a harmonious way.
Thank you both. And I have two questions here that I think are fairly related. So I'm going to try and merge them and see if it comes out right. And I hope I'm addressing your questions appropriately. So Colleen and I think Dr. Ostro again, the first part of this question would be, are we sufficiently emphasizing the potential multidisciplinary benefit of ALS research projects? And then the second part to that question that I thought was somewhat related is there a way that we can influence the grant approval process for NIH funding, just to make sure it's diverse and supporting that multidisciplinary approach? Colleen, do you want to try to take a stab at that one first?
Sure, why not?
It's a tough one.
Yeah, it's a good one. So I would say to the first part of influence or sufficiently talking about multidisciplinary care and the impact on research, I would say the answer is yes. And I know in my conversations on the Hill, and Denise and Dustin might have some other thoughts as well. That is part of every conversation that we have, which is the impact of having a multidisciplinary center that people can go to. First, the reality that only about 40 or 50% of people living with ALS actually get to those centers, recognizing that at those centers, that there's research to support that it extends someone's life and quality of life. And then the ability to enter into clinical trials, goes up exponentially when they can get to those centers. So that's been a big portion of our push, not just on the Hill, but even at the ALS Association itself. We made a recent announcement that we'll be investing in expanding at clinical access for all of those reasons. So I think that that answer is a definitive yes, and there's just a lot more work to be done in that area. I would probably would turn to Dr. Ostro around the influencing NIH funding. I say that with a slight giggle because boy, that's a tough one. But I'll let you maybe more of the expert to answer
Yeah.
that.
So first to the multidisciplinary care, like I'm a clinician, right? And you know, it's really important for me to be able to take care of my own patients as best as possible. And multidisciplinary care in ALS is the standard of care, right? But it's not paid for by insurances right now. And we all know this. It's why I'm so thrilled about the ALS Better Cares Act. And I really think that will help us to deliver not just the best multidisciplinary care, but find ways to do it to people who don't live near one of these brick and mortar large centers, right? Almost every large ALS center has a foundation attached to it. Why? Because they have to subsidize the clinical care of people living with the disease who they're seeing. You know, both, it's kind of interesting that this questions to this. So the DoD program and also ALSA, I think, are the two places that I know of that right now are funding grants specifically to look at ways to improve aspects of multidisciplinary care, right? We have a funding mechanism at DoD that's designed to help figure out, you know, how to do this best, how to optimize respiratory care strategies, or, you know, ambulation, whatever it might be, how to do telehealth better, how to involve, you know, digital measurement, how to reach people for clinical trials who don't live near one of these clinical centers. And I think that that's really important funding. Cure funding is important, cause funding is important, but also funding to help right now improve the care and quality of life of people living with the disease. As far as how to influence what gets funded, so the NIH, you know, since the 1940s actually has had this peer review process to review grants, and it's really the reason that the US, I think, has led the world in research, and it's a really detailed process, and you know, it values the best science. As far as priorities for ALS, one of the things that we've learned in the DoD program is that we can make our funding mechanisms highlight specific requirements or have specific things that we're focusing on. And we can give those instructions to the researchers when they're writing the proposals, and we give those instructions to the peer reviewers, the programmatic reviewers. And for example, you know, we talked about the importance of data sharing, right? We can make it clear that we want people writing proposals where they have to tell us how they're going to share the data, where the data is going to go, how it's going to be accessible, and that's something that their grants are going to be evaluated on. And so each year we change those criteria, and we try to optimize them so that we are, in essence, directing researchers on how to do what we think is prioritizing the most important things for ALS therapy development.
Thank you both.
I have a little something to add.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Denise.
Little behind the scenes work that we do here at the ALS Association. And when we engage with members of Congress, every year we try to put out a Dear Colleague letter. And the Dear Colleague letter will say, I'm a member of Congress and I support these funding requests for ALS research. So that's going to come out soon. But in those discussions back and forth with, you know, the staff that are leading this effort and the members that are going to lead this effort for us, one thing that came up during a former conversation we had about the ALS Better Care Act is like a standardization of care, or just like, how do you quality control the care or provide guidance more so than just, hey, I'm just throwing it out in the wind, you know, here's the way we should treat someone with ALS. So there's a lot of standards out there already, but more can be done to really provide better quality of care. So we're trying to write that kind of phrasing into our Dear Colleague letter and see if this is something that the NIH will take on in the future research as well. So we're trying to do that kind of idea. So I'm glad it was brought up.
Thanks, Denise. I appreciate your added comments for sure. I wanted to finish with one last question. We do have several questions left in the Q&A, but I do want to keep to time here. And so there are some questions about the ALS registry. There are some questions about how the ALS impacts people in the military in particular. We will follow up with those of you who we didn't get to your questions today, but I did want to end with a question specific to advocacy. So Denise and Dustin, over the last few years, I've participated as a part of our ALS advocacy group who've met each summer with congressmen and US senators to present our asks. How will the election year affect this summer's advocacy efforts?
Well, it'll be a lot more fun. No, we are expecting that during the usual August recess, and like last year, they're home for 4 weeks, and what they're trying to do is meet with a lot of constituents in their district or in their state. And that's where we want you to get engaged as well. And the election's not really going to interfere with it. They're just going to have a lot of different priorities, a lot of juggling balls in the air. They'll be doing a lot of stuff, but we still want you to engage. And Dustin can kind of share that a little bit more.
Yes, so it's an exciting opportunity actually for us because as Denise was saying, you have the full House is up and a third of the Senate. So these are folks who are really wanting to hear from constituents, which means they really want to hear from you and want to know how they can help you. So this is a great opportunity if you see them out and about, to raise that question. Ask them, well, what do you know about ALS? What do you want to do about ALS? Are you committed to increasing ALS research funding? Have those conversations with them, get to know them, get to know their staffs. I think that's the big thing here is, a lot of the for these offices, the staffs are the brains for the constituent, for that member. So get to know them well. So beyond the member, get to know that staff person. They are very important. So they know you, they know that you represent ALS and that your perspective there. So get to know the office as well as the member, and when they're out and about. And we will have activities for August. We're working on those right now so that you can be out and about and connect with folks for elected officials across the spectrum.
Thank you both, and thank you, Colony. Thank you, Lyle. Thank you, Denise, and thank you, Dustin, for answering questions today. But more importantly, thank you all for joining this ALS community conversation on our fiscal year 2025 ALS research appropriations. We will continue to have opportunities like this where we can update you on the latest ALS news and in ALS advocacy and share ways that you can take action and influence your members of Congress to progress ALS treatments and care. And I think that some folks were putting some things in the chat about webinars that are coming soon. So please stay tuned. We love when you participate in these and you ask these wonderful questions. So thank you all for joining us today. And I'm going to close our webinar for right now. Thank you. Have a great day, everybody.